So, hi there. I'm Michael Diamond. I'm the Academic Director of Integrated Marketing and Communications in the Division of Programs and Business at the School of Professional Studies at NYU. And I'm absolutely delighted to be in conversation today with Carmella Glover. Carmella is a very distinguished alumni of our master's program, our master's in PR and corporate communication, and she is now the Executive Director of the PRSA Foundation, so the major industry body and their sort of non-profit charitable activities. So welcome, Carmella, and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the position, what you're working on at the PRSA.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. It's wonderful to be here with you today. So as you said, I'm the Executive Director at the Public Relations Society of America Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of PRSA, or Public Relations Society of America. And we are solely dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the public relations and corporate communications field. So my primary role there is overseeing the operations and programming of the nonprofit, but also the budget and the strategy. Kind of some of the more tactical things land on the leadership, even in a nonprofit, because it's so small. So it's a little bit of a mixed pot. But the most important part of it is really emphasizing education and training and initiatives that support public relations professionals who are looking to either expand their personal knowledge of diversity and inclusion efforts, or who are looking to help inform strategy in their organization for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's a little bit about what I do at the PRSA Foundation.
Fantastic, fantastic, and obviously a wonderful hire for the PRSA, and a credit to our program, but more especially a credit to you and your contribution. One of the things we have a lot of questions about and interests from alumni and students indeed is this whole question of networking. And I wondered if you could comment a little bit. I'm sure, doing the work you do today, you spend a lot of time networking with funders and potential partners, etc. But tell us a little bit about, how you leverage your network and perhaps to some extent how you built your network.
So I think there's really no question that the value of networking is invaluable, actually. It really is the way that I was able to navigate through not only my experience at NYU, but afterwards. And that, as you said, every day, literally, there's an opportunity to network, and there's benefits to it. For us at the foundation, potential funders or those who want to volunteer for the organization. And for me, networking was invaluable in finding this role. I met the chair of the PRSA Foundation board, who's currently, my immediate supervisor. I met him at an event. So NYU, specifically SPS, sends out opportunities all the time for students to go to events. And one of the key questions that I get from current students is, how do you find time to network when you've got either an internship or you're working full time and you're in school full time, and you just have to find the time. It's one of those things. I consider it almost like an elective. It really will help to propel your career and get you to know folks who are actually putting what you're learning in class into a practical application for you. So we'll talk probably a little bit about mentorship organically at some point during this conversation, but networking is how you can find a mentor without seeming opportunistic, just getting to know people. So both while I was a student and even afterward, practicing it while you're a student makes it so much easier once you graduate and you're in the professional world and you need to do that.
Yeah, and my understanding is that the school itself now has invested a lot in the idea of building out the alumni network. Particularly, there is this whole sort of initiative and platform called the Violet Network, which I'm a member of. I believe you're a member, and many alumni, many professors, and industry partners are part of this growing part of this network. And that seems to me a really fantastic tool to leverage. So, anybody listening in, if you haven't done so already, I think both Carmella and I would strongly encourage you to sign up for something like that.
I agree.
So, one of the things, obviously it's lovely to celebrate, and reminisce about our time at the school together. But I wondered if you might focus a little bit on perhaps a particular professor or a particular project or a moment at the school where you really felt perhaps you had sort of an aha moment, or you came to some understanding about your career and where you wanted to go. I'm just interested in sort of how some of that education impacted you very directly, very viscerally at the school.
Sure. Honestly, there's not just one instance of an aha moment. I think there were several confirmations for me, and definitely not so subtle confirmations that this was the right place for me to be. And I've got two professors in mind. And honestly, I could tell you something about each and every one of my professors that really cemented for me that this was the right place for me to be and the right school to be at. But particularly I'm thinking of Professor Shawnice Hawkins. She taught me PR history and theory, and really just getting a perspective from a teacher of color made me realize, looking into the PR profession, if you look at the leadership there, there's not a lot of diversity, and that's obviously something that became a passion point for me as it became my career. But that's where I really realized, this is the right place for me, and what I want to do is be a part of the movement that diversifies PR. She shared PR history, but not just from the perspective of Ivy Lee and Edward Bernays, but we learned about PR history that was shaped by people from all diverse backgrounds. And it may not necessarily be a part of our textbooks, but she made it a part of the curriculum. And for me, I said, she's changing attitudes and behaviors. She's shaping us as students. And that was really one of the first aha moments I had. It was my first semester at NYU. I said, this means this is where I'm supposed to be. And I'm learning about the history of public relations through the lens of someone who looks like me. So for me, that was the very first indication. But there's more than one professor. There's Professor Mogul, who helped me through my thesis. He was my thesis advisor. And Professor Dara Cody, who was my critical business skills. And business skills are important for public relations practitioners. And it was nice to see that come together, and for a professor to be really tough on the students, which helped in the long run. So there's multiple instances where I said, this was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made to attend the PR program at SPS.
And it's absolutely fascinating that you mentioned Ed Bernays, and many people might know he's what is often called the father of public relations. He certainly seems to have invented the term public relations or public relations council. But perhaps a more little known fact is that he actually taught the very first course anywhere in the US, a university course in public relations, and he taught it at NYU. So in 1923, Ed Bernays taught the very first educational program, a university course in PR. And, I like to think of him, although there's been many advances since, including the diversity and inclusion of the field, but I like to think of him as sort of the epitome of the reflective practitioner that I think the school has, because he really applied both his learning and insights and research around the psychology. He was, don't forget, Freud's nephew. So he sort of applied that knowledge, but also, real practical wisdom about how this thing is done to his teaching and students at NYU. So it's tremendous. You mentioned, your lovely faculty, Shawnice and Kevin and Alan, in the context of Ed Bernays, who kind of started it all. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very, very powerful. And in a sense, I think that's a good segue to a conversation I'd love to have with you about mentorship. At your, so some of our listeners may recall that you were the convocation speaker in 2019 for our graduation, and I think a popular choice, let's put it that way. And you delivered an incredibly eloquent speech that we all still remember. And one of the things in that speech that struck me particularly was this sort of recognition you gave to, I think the phrase was a chain of mentorship, perhaps a phrase from Professor Garcia, and talking about the importance and the obligation, perhaps even, you have to sort of pass on mentorship and wisdom to new generations. So I'd love to chat to you a little bit about that. Like, what was your experience of mentorship at the school, and how do you find, as a working professional, a busy working professional, you can sort of pass it on, pass it forward, pay it forward, I guess.
Sure. So as a student, I originally struggled with, how do I find a mentor organically? It's difficult, but PR is all about relationships and building relationships. And it's not necessarily just between a brand and its constituents, or, a agency and its clients. I mean, the relationships that happen organically are normally the ones that turn into mentorship. So I think I had this idea that I was seeking a mentor, and I was going to go ask someone, will you be my mentor? And most of my mentor-mentee relationships, from both where I'm the mentee and where I'm the mentor, happened by, through networking. So it's all kind of full circle. And it's just a matter of someone taking a vested interest in you asking the right questions, having, and not forced right questions, but being genuinely curious about something someone is doing. And people love to talk about themselves, and so if you're genuinely interested in what they're doing and you talk to them about it and you show that interest, it typically blossoms into a relationship where you may not necessarily acknowledge them formally as your mentor until years later or months later. So
Yeah.
while I was a student, I developed a mentor-mentee relationship that I had no idea was that way, with many professors, sometimes with guest speakers. After class, everyone lines up to talk to the guest speaker, but if there's a real chemistry there, that will happen organically. They'll say, you know what, send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn. You may have some conversations with them, and it will, it'll turn into something that's really beautiful. And it has definitely translated over into my professional experience. I do speak to professionals from different organizations every day, and a lot of times they're looking for counsel on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but there's a lot that they could also share with me. Especially because I'm relatively new to public relations. There's sometimes mentorship that's only a one-time deal where you get a really good lesson from someone, and then there's a relationship where you're talking to someone regularly on a quarterly basis, or every couple of months. But putting a label on it, I think, puts too much pressure on students and even professionals. I think just having those folks you can go to for counsel, those count as mentors too.
Yeah, it reminds me in a funny way about the whole discussion around finding your passion, which always seems to me like that's too overwhelming, to know what your passion is. But you can be intellectually curious, and you can spend your life, discovering things. I think the same is true for mentorship. I think it's a really important aspect you've just highlighted is, worry less about the formal nature of the relationship and more about, or what you call that relationship, and more about the nature of the relationship, what you're getting out of it. And I would emphasize, I think, reflect back exactly what you said of many people who are in the roles of mentors often find enormous value themselves out of that relationship. And I encourage students, many of whom who are, young emerging professionals or come from industries that aren't well represented, or come from, countries outside the US, they have so much to offer back to people that they may see as their formal mentors, but they probably have as much menteeship or mentoring to give back. So I think the other place, I don't know if you've had direct experience with this, but I think the school also, that's another area where the school sees alumni like you as playing a really important role. And my little promo would be to encourage any alumni watching this to get on the Violet Network and sign up for the new mentorship program that's just been introduced, which is both, for mentors and mentees. It's a wonderful opportunity to give back and stay part of the school and its community.
Agreed. Yeah, the Wasserman Center is pretty much facilitating this mentorship program, and I think it's awesome. I intend to join as an alumni mentor, and like you said, mentors are often learn just as much from their mentees as their mentees get from them. And I'm more than willing to sit and listen and learn from, especially those who are still in school. I mean, the most advanced of technology is kind of happening and growing now, and a lot of times that's where you're getting your best learning, from those who are still in the the application period as opposed to really doing it. So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, it may be an idea we want to develop. I think some companies have what they call reverse mentorship programs where, you know, more senior executives invite younger executives or younger customers or consumers or whatever to sort of educate them. So that may be something we can explore together. I want to transition and no pun intended, but I want to transition to career transitions. So I love the fact, frankly, that you started out life as a chemical engineer, and you know, working at some illustrious brands like J&J and L'Oreal. But you were a chemical engineer by training and profession, and you made this decision to pivot to PR, or at least you know, to apply to NYU, SPS, and study PR. So we have a lot of alumni in similar positions, or at least, you know, thinking about pivots. And the school, I think, is beginning to take that notion of pivoting quite seriously. You may be aware we're launching in the fall a certificate in healthcare marketing and communications, because we recognize there's a lot of people out there who may be marketers or PR folks working in an industry and saying, you know what, healthcare sounds like a good place to be, good careers, you know, giving back, etc. But for whatever reason, you know, brings people back to school, or has them considering pivoting and transitioning. I'd love to sort of just understand what went through your mind, if you can cast back to that point, and how you made that decision to come to NYU and ultimately pivot to an entirely different career.
Sure. So as a chemical engineer, especially working for beauty and pharmaceutical brands, I did some really cool stuff. And, you know, as I traveled up the corporate ladder, there was more opportunity to network with marketing and public relations professionals who wanted to see what we did. They wanted to show it to, you know, our key stakeholders, especially our consumers. This is what happens behind the scenes. This is how we get from a marketing idea to an actual product. And so while I did some really cool things, it was not something that was very public facing. And having had the conversations with marketers, they were still very numbers heavy. PR professionals as well. You know, a lot of folks say they join or they come into public relations because they don't like numbers, but most of the marketers and public relations professionals that I know, especially the really good ones, they're dealing with numbers every day. And they're able to shape the behaviors of our consumers. So I can make a great product as a chemical engineer, you know, making sure that it has all the best chemicals and or lack of chemicals and just really great raw ingredients. But it's up to our marketing and PR professionals to relay that to consumers, and they really shape the story. And that was really interesting for me. I think what interaction really drove for me that I want to learn more about being a communications professional was doing a short film for our PR team on how we're making one of our most popular creams when I was working at L'Oreal. And I worked for the Kiehl's brand at L'Oreal, making a cream called Creme de Corps. It's you know, a multi-million-dollar brand. Actually, it's $1 billion brand at this point. And I didn't realize how much went into really shaping the story of the brand and the products. They came one day, they did some film, they took some B-roll, and they had scripts, and they, you know, there was just all of these public relations elements and kind of tactical things that were happening that I said, that looks fun. But knowing as a chemical engineer that, you know, and engineers aren't typically the most communicative of people, I realized I needed some fundamental knowledge in communications. And, you know, I went on NYU's website. NYU was closed. I also went to Syracuse's website, and I went to USC. And ultimately, NYU's program really spoke to me. There were professionals who were also professors. So not just, and obviously there's professors who have always been professors full-time in theory, but in the SPS program, most of the professors, if not all, were professionals. So they would be able to give me that experience perspective that at many other schools, it was, you know, lifetime professors and that was it. And that's great from an academic standpoint, but I was really looking for something more experiential. And I did attend some of the pre-admission video conferences they had, and at that time we could go in person and network with alumni and with current professors and professionals who were at NYU, and I was just blown away. You know, folks were really passionate about the program. I think it was Carrie at the time, Carrie O'Grady. She spoke at one of the programs, and I was just enamored by NYU. And so it was one of 3 schools that I was considering, but it was the only school I applied to, because NYU, I mean, New York itself is the mecca of public relations. And it just made sense to me with the professional aspect, with the positive response from alumni. And that's not to say that the program was perfect, but everyone had an amazing experience and came out of it, you know, a better professional, even if they were already had a PR background. They came out of it more polished and just more ready to either elevate their career or transition their career. And for me, that sold it. And I was, you know, obviously I still always have a passion for science and for that attention to detail that being in pharmacy requires, but that all transfers over to public relations. There's always transferable skills. Attention to detail is really important for communicators, because, you know, you make a mistake and it reflects on your brand or your company or your agency. So, you know, there's a lot of transferable stuff there. And sometimes I miss the science and the technical elements, but I did that, you know, for 10 years. And it was time to try something new.
Well, I think that's a good point to transition to some conversations around the core skills. And I know we have some other things we want to talk about. We'll come back to those, but let's talk a little bit about, you know, you provided great opportunity to start thinking about that, how you blend the creative side, the brand storytelling that you were so enamored with at first, and the science and the fact base insights that, you know, are part of your training. What, you know, when you look at emerging young professionals, working with them now and, you know, watching them across the industry, what's some of the sort of key skills and mindsets you think that our graduate students, you know, ought to really be thinking about, ought to be focusing on?
So interesting that you would ask that. My thesis was actually on what distinguishes students who graduate from different PR programs. And so, for example, if you've got 2 students who both have the same degree from 2 different schools, you know, what differentiates them? And I'll actually start with mindset, because that wasn't part of the thesis, but the mindset, you've got to be curious, you've got to want to learn, you know, and in public relations, you really need to be the convener of all information, and you've got to be curious and want to learn. Research is always the first step in public relations. You know, when you get to your 101 public relations class, the first thing that they always tell you about a campaign is do your research. And that's one thing. You've got to be a curious person if you want to be successful in PR. But as far as distinguishing yourself as a candidate, and that was actually one of my research questions, what distinguishes me as a candidate when I graduate from NYU? And obviously it didn't have the specificity of NYU in the thesis, but what distinguishes me as a master's candidate when I have this? And I think there's a few things, there's a few skills that you need to come out with, and networking is definitely one of them, but there's an experiential element to our program, and that's the practicum. And it looks different at different schools, but the practicum gives you an opportunity to work with a real client. And there are electives that allow for you to kind of dabble in what you would like to do as a PR professional. So I would definitely say, you know, taking those electives and taking the electives you don't necessarily think you want to do. So, you know, if you think you want to do fashion PR, take the investor relations course, because, you know, those are some, you can really realize there that one, either you really don't want to do it or you really do. But it gives you some skills coming out. I think what a lot of students do is they know what they want to do going in, and they're taking a specific track. But I think that curiosity should lead you to take classes that you don't think you're necessarily going to use once you graduate. You know, and in hindsight, I would have taken, we have a nonprofit PR class, and in hindsight, I would have taken that, as I couldn't have pictured that I would graduate and not go into an agency or support a brand. And that's where my mind really was, because that's where I'd been for the last 10 years, is supporting a brand. But had I taken that nonprofit PR class, I might have had a little bit more to start with. But again, there's transferable skills. You know, you can't take every class, right? But really that mindset of curiosity and really just understanding that, you know, you're going to learn and grow as a student. You're not going to have no path is straight. Any PR professional you'll talk to will tell you that. But you've got to have those number skills also. I would say, take a marketing class. It's an elective for the PR program, but it gives you kind of those numbers background. I mean, we do a good job at NYU of having the business classes, because your PR professionals, in order to have a seat at the table, you've got to understand business, not just campaigns and creativity. And so I would say those are the things that coming into the professional world are really useful, that you can get from the curriculum.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous overview. We talk about more explicitly on the marketing side of our department of marketing being a human-centered and data-driven initiative, and I think that is increasingly true of PR. Absolutely. Where measurement and the evaluation of the effectiveness of PR is as important, or leveraging the insights from data into public opinion or consumer psychology, that's all becoming more and more important. So the blend of the two clearly is imperative. And I think it's helpful that you reference the opportunities that you have in a school like NYU, and even beyond the School of Professional Studies, the things you get to study and people you get to interact with. So I think these are foundational things for our students. I think one of the other things, and I've talked about this in the past, is this idea of operating ethically and thinking about the broader world, the broader stakeholders that we serve, and the role that brands and businesses we support play. And that seems like a useful platform to talk a bit about what's frankly core to your work at the PRSA Foundation. You guys have been phenomenal, I think, in really defining the debate and the discussion around diversity and inclusiveness in the industry. So I would love it if you could share with our listeners some thoughts about what you think some of the major opportunities and challenges still are out there in the industry with respect to diversity and inclusion.
So I think honestly, it's really obvious at this point, especially given the current social justice movement that's happening, that we have a dearth of diverse professionals in the industry. You can pull up the board of directors or the C-suite of 90% of PR firms and agencies, and see that there's they're very homogenous, I'll say. And it's an issue, and it's become more evident over the past, I would say, 5 or 10 years or so. But it's an old issue. It's something that even professionals who have been in the industry for 30 years have been dealing with. And so now I think it's coming to a head as PR agencies, or on behalf of their clients, they make big mistakes that they then have to go and publicly apologize for. And that's part of the PR role, is to protect a brand's reputation, and to protect even internally, the integrity of the organization. And with diversity and equity and inclusion having even greater focus now, more relevant now than ever, I would say, with what's going on. Very reminiscent, and obviously I wasn't there, but we all read about what has happened in 1968, and it's very reminiscent of that, where we have this movement. I think there is some opportunity for PR firms and communications firms and marketing firms to really authentically and genuinely take this issue on, not just in their responses and their espousal of their values, but in actually taking action to improve the diversity of our industry. And when we say diversity, equity, and inclusion, there may be a good amount of diversity number-wise in the organization, but where is that diversity? Is that all at the entry level? And maybe it is throughout the entire organization. And so you've got good numbers, but is there inclusion there? Does everyone feel like they belong, like they are respected? And then the value of equity is immense. I mean, equity means that everyone has a fair opportunity to be promoted, to be a part of a leading group in the organization. So does everyone have a fair shake at being successful in your firm? And in general in the industry, we're not doing it well. And I think you'll see, especially through our work at the Diversity Action Alliance, which is an initiative, a cross-industry initiative between all the PR trade organizations, I think you're going to start to see a lot more of that transparency come through. And that's what PR is all about. You know, we're about ethics, and transparency is important in getting our key messages out. And a lot of folks are looking at it as PR stunts that organizations are coming out with the, you know, we stand with Black Lives Matter, or we stand against racism. I think it's not necessarily PR and spin. I think we just need to wait for that second step, for the foot to drop, where actions come behind the espousal of the organization's beliefs. So not only do we stand against racism, but here's what we're doing in our organization. And to me, it's not PR spin. I think most organizations understand the value, if not just to their bottom line, but, you know, to their employees, and then making sure that they have the best of the best when it comes to solutions for their clients. It's important, and it's not questionable. That's not questionable anymore. The values of the organizations are going to state, quite frankly, that, you know, diversity is important to us. I think the action behind it is what matters, and is what we're going to be looking for over the next few years from organizations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it clearly, it makes moral sense, and it makes good business sense. And hopefully, you know, we didn't need the second to realize the first, but you know, those two things catch up with each other. I'm wondering, or at least curious, whether you had any thoughts specifically about how programs like ours, or environments like NYU SPS, could really shoulder some more of the work here, or at the very least, and I know it's not just about words, it's more about actions, but at the very least, engage students and faculty in that dialogue, in that important dialogue.
Sure. I mean, I think it starts with just the institutional values, and NYU absolutely values diversity. And, you know, for organizations, educational institutes that have tenured faculty, make sure that your tenured faculty represents, you know, at least the community that you're in. And New York, we know, is one of the most diverse, if not the most diverse of states. And so making sure that your students represent that, your faculty represents that it's weaved into the curriculum, that there's someone who is advising on DE&I, and that person really has a hand in the strategy of what's going on in the organization, and how things are communicated. So it can't just be the you know, the PR folks that have, or the HR folks that have. It's got to be in every aspect of the institution, that we actually live those values of valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think NYU does a great job of it, in that I had all types of teachers from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all religions. You know, there was just a spectrum of diversity there. But I think to even go deeper into it, just making sure that those key messages that are sent from, you know, the president's office are sensitive to all of the different backgrounds. And I'm not saying it's easy, because there are tons of different backgrounds of folks that come into as students, as faculty, as staff, and, you know, just making sure that everything from the board to the students represents that. And I think NYU actually does do a really good job. I know when I was there, they had, you know, monthly celebrations. There was an international student organization. There's affinity organizations for the students, and not just, and maybe, you know, mirroring what's going to happen in the professional world. You know, employee resource groups or business resource groups, they're used to advise leadership when things happen, or when there's a strategic decision that needs to be made, and you want to make sure that it's an inclusive decision, utilizing those student groups or those faculty groups to say, here's the decision that we've made as an organization. Does this reflect our values? And does this reflect, you know, you as a group, or us as a collective diverse organization? And I think that's probably one of the bigger things that can be done.
Yeah, well, you know, I think you'd be pleased to learn that, you know, we've continued your good work since you left. And, you know, my sense of the school, it really does represent the best of what New York has always come to be known for, and is striving very hard to create this sense of belonging and inclusiveness, and, you know, so that people really find their home here and feel they're represented. And and reflected in not just the student body but the faculty and the staff, etc. So it's important work, and I thank you for your thoughts on that. I think we're probably in the interest of our audience's attention coming towards the end of our time. So I guess I would ask you maybe if you had any sort of parting words around, some good counsel or advice to perhaps focus more on students and, our graduating students or emerging young professionals. I know, of course, you would encourage people to reach out to you, and they're welcome to reach out to me too. I think the alumni office will share our Twitter handles and our LinkedIn contacts. So folks should feel they have ways to get hold of us. But just as a parting thought, any broad areas of good counsel and advice, from a seasoned alum now, that you would offer to our students.
I don't know if I would consider myself a seasoned alum, but one thing that really important for me was you get out of the experience as a student what you put into it, and then even afterward, when you graduate, still contributing as an alumni, still coming back to the school to see what new programs have happened, to see what advances have been made, since your feedback as a student and your feedback is important. At the end of your courses, make sure that you are giving, that feedback. And it sounds very cliche. It sounds very like this. I promise that I wasn't told to say this, but it makes a difference when you give that feedback. If you feel that you are not getting a diverse perspective and you're in a specific class, give that feedback, because it's listened to. Also, when I say you get out of it what you put into it, I made time for everything that was important at NYU, from student clubs to going to networking events to making sure that I touched base with my professors one-on-one, because everybody is not going to take advantage of that. So you may think, well, everyone's going to go and talk to the professor, especially if it's, let's say you've got a professional in residence who is working during the day and a professor at night, which most of them are. Of course, everyone's going to want to clamor up to the professor at the end of the course and talk to them. But at the end of the day, not everyone's going to take that opportunity. So you have to do that, and be yourself. Don't be afraid to be yourself and be uniquely you. I wouldn't be a diversity professional if I didn't say that, but we all bring a unique perspective to our classwork, to our students, and for those of us who are faculty, and as alumni, you will find that you'll differentiate yourself if you are yourself and you're not trying to follow exactly in someone else's footsteps. They may have the job you want, but they're not you. And that's something that has really been helpful for me, is to really put in a lot of effort and take everything that you can get from what NYU has to offer. You pay your tuition, and there's a lot that you can get out of the Wasserman Center, out of just networking with your professors, out of taking advantage of everything and there's so much that I found out NYU has to offer that I wish I had been able to, I've known about, or some new things that have come from, since I've graduated. So I would say take advantage. And even as alumni, there's a lot of resources for us as alumni that NYU doesn't just let you go and say, okay, good luck. Hopefully you'll have a good professional career. So really, I think it's putting in that effort, and if at any time in your career putting in effort is important, it's while you're in school and have that time and have access to those resources. So that's it for me.
Fantastic. Well, those are wonderful thoughts to close on. This notion of uniquely you, I think, probably resonates with all of us, however long ago it was we graduated and wherever we are in our professions. And certainly it's profoundly good counsel to, take advantage of resources and put the effort into, chasing what you want. So I want to thank you sincerely. I know that Sonal Pandey, the head of our alumni office, would join me in both congratulating you on your career and where you've gone since school, and also thanking you for joining these conversations. Very much appreciate the time. And then my own personal thank you to Danielle Orenberger, who helped us both set this up and facilitate the conversation today. So many thanks to everyone, and especially many thanks to you, Carmella.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure. It always is.